Jack Miller never thought much about fate. He'd built his life the way he built engines, piece by piece, steady, honest. Now, at 52, he owned a small auto shop on the south side of Chicago, had two grown kids in college, and a wife who still packed his lunch every morning. He wasn't rich, but everything he had was earned with his hands. Most nights, when the shop lights went dark, he'd stop by O'Malley's, a quiet bar with good bourbon and no loud music. It wasn't about drinking. It was about unwinding, watching the game, listening to the hum of other people's stories. That Thursday, the stool beside him creaked as another man sat down. Older, maybe mid-60s, gray hair, neat coat, the calm posture of someone who'd spent a lifetime keeping his nerves steady. A doctor, maybe, Jack thought. He had that air. The bartender poured 2 drinks. They nodded politely, strangers sharing the comfort of silence. After a while, the man glanced at Jack's wedding ring and said with a faint smile, "Kids?" "2," Jack replied. "Boy and a girl. Both trying to figure out their lives." The man's smile faded a little. "You're lucky," he said quietly. "I've got one. Not by blood, but still mine." And for reasons Jack couldn't name, those words landed heavier than they should have. Jack wasn't the kind of man who pried. He'd spent too many years around engines and men who talked only when something was worth saying. Still, something in that stranger's voice, soft, tired, and full of weight, stuck with him. They sat in silence a while, watching a replay of the Cubs game on the muted TV. Then Jack said, "Not by blood, huh? Guess that doesn't matter much." The older man nodded slowly. "No, it doesn't. My wife and I, we couldn't have children. Then one night, back in the 90s, I was on call at the hospital. There was a baby left behind. No name, no one claiming him." He paused, tracing a finger along the rim of his glass. "We took him home a few weeks later. Been ours ever since." Jack felt a small chill move through him. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the casual way the man said it, like it was both miracle and confession. "Must have been something," Jack murmured. "It was," the man said. "Still is. He's grown now. Doctor himself, believe it or not." He smiled faintly, but his eyes didn't match. Jack nodded, raising his glass. "You did good." The man looked at him for a long second, as if searching for something in his face. Then he said quietly, "I like to think so, but some nights, I wonder if I stole a life that was never mine to keep." Jack didn't react right away. He just sat there, watching the way the man's hand shook slightly as he spoke. Old hands, doctor's hands, steady once, still careful now. Something about his story tugged at Jack's memory like a loose wire. He'd heard plenty of people talk about fate, about second chances, but this was different. There was a date forming in his mind, a year he didn't want to revisit. "What year was that?" Jack asked, trying to sound casual. 93, the man said after a moment. "Spring. Late April. South Mercy Hospital." Jack froze. The noise of the bar fell away. The same year. The same hospital. He remembered that night. The hallway, the nurse who wouldn't look at him, the sound of the rain outside when he signed the paper. He'd been 22, scared, selfish, convinced he was doing the right thing. He took a sip of bourbon, slow and steady, masking the storm building in his chest. "Funny," he said, his voice low. "I knew someone who worked there back then." The man smiled faintly. "Small world," he said. Jack nodded, staring at the amber in his glass. "Yeah," he murmured. "Smaller than you think." That night, Jack drove home in silence. The streets of Chicago glowed wet under the drizzle, headlights smearing across the windshield. The radio was on, but he didn't hear a word of it. His mind was stuck on that one name, South Mercy Hospital. Could be a coincidence, he told himself. There were a dozen hospitals in the city. Hundreds of kids born that spring. Thousands of stories like that. And yet, he remembered the smell of disinfectant, the cracked tiles under his boots, the doctor's calm voice telling him, "If you're sure about this, sign here." He'd been too young, too proud, too stupid to imagine that moment would follow him for the rest of his life. At home, the house was quiet. His wife was asleep, the clock ticking steady in the kitchen. Jack poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. He tried to picture the man's son, a doctor now. Around 30, maybe. That would make sense. Still, it was too thin to mean anything. Too risky to even believe. But when he turned out the light and lay in bed, the man's voice came back to him. There was a baby left behind, and for the first time in years, Jack wished he could forget something he never really stopped remembering. The following week, Jack found himself back at O'Malley's. He told himself it was just habit, nothing more. But when he saw the same gray coat at the far end of the bar, something in his chest tightened. The doctor, Alan, he now learned, greeted him with that same polite smile. "Evening, Jack." They talked about harmless things at first: weather, work, the city's endless construction. Alan had a way of speaking that made everything sound calm, measured like a man used to control. Jack waited, then eased in casually. "You said your boy's a doctor now? That's something. Must have taken after you." Alan chuckled softly. "Maybe a little. He's better than I ever was. Smarter too. Works over at St. Luke's now." "Surgery? St. Luke's," Jack repeated quietly. He knew that hospital. His wife had gone there for a checkup once. South Side again. Same neighborhood where he'd left his past buried. Alan swirled the ice in his glass. "Funny how life circles back, isn't it?" Jack nodded, staring at his reflection in the amber liquid. "Yeah," he said. "Funny, and sometimes cruel." Alan looked at him, then, a hint of something in his eyes, recognition, maybe your guilt. But the moment passed, swallowed by the noise of the bar. That night, Jack couldn't let it go. He told himself it was just curiosity, that it didn't mean anything, but the thought sat in his head like grit in a gear. When the shop closed, he went up to the attic to find an old metal box he hadn't opened in years. Inside were a few yellowed photos, some pay stubs from the 90s, and a folded hospital bracelet with fading letters. Mercy General, April 24th, 1993. He ran his thumb over it, feeling the rough plastic. The name line was blank. It always had been. He checked online later that night, searching out of nothing more than restlessness. South Mercy Hospital, Chicago, 1993, birth records closed adoption. The search didn't give him much, but the location matched what Alan had said. The dates, too. He sat back in his chair, staring at the dim screen glow. It could all be coincidence. Chicago was a big city. Thousands of kids born that year. Thousands of fathers who ran. But something in his gut wouldn't shut up. Jack closed the laptop and sat there for a long time, the bracelet still in his hand. It didn't prove anything, and yet, somehow, it felt like proof already. A few evenings later, Jack stopped by O'Malley's again. He told his wife he'd be late. Inventory at the shop, he said. It wasn't a lie exactly, just not the full truth. Alan was already there. Same stool, same quiet smile. "I was hoping you'd show," he said. "You strike me as a man who doesn't like loose ends." Jack chuckled. "Guess you could say that." They talked for a while about work. Then Alan, almost absently, said, "Funny thing about that night at the hospital. It was storming hard. Power flickered 3 times. Half the city went dark for an hour." Jack froze. He remembered that storm. The wind had bent the trees sideways, and the thunder rolled over the hospital roof like artillery. He'd stood under the canopy outside, soaked to the skin, unable to go back, and once he'd signed the paper. Alan went on, staring into his drink. "I was on call that night. My wife was with me. She always said it felt like fate, that we were meant to be there." Jack swallowed hard. "April 24th, right?" Alan nodded slowly. "Yeah, you got a good memory." Jack smiled faintly, though his throat felt tight. "Some nights," he said, "you don't forget, even if you want to." That night, Jack drove home through the late-night traffic, the hum of tires loud in his ears. The city looked different now, like every light, every face might somehow lead back to that boy. His boy. He parked outside the house, but didn't go in right away. The porch light was on. His wife always left it for him. Inside, he could see the framed photos on the wall, his daughter in her graduation gown, his son fixing up the first car they rebuilt together. Proof that he'd become a better man eventually. But no picture on that wall could rewrite the one memory he'd buried deepest. A hospital corridor, a signature, and the sound of a newborn crying somewhere he'd never see. He sat in his truck until the dashboard clock blinked past midnight. The truth pressed on him like weight. The boy hadn't been lost, not really. He'd just been given to someone better prepared to love him. Jack whispered to the empty street. "What the hell am I supposed to do with this?" The wind didn't answer. And for the first time in decades, Jack realized that maybe the hardest part of living honest was knowing when to stay silent. The next day, Jack drove to St. Luke's. He told himself it was just curiosity, that he only wanted to see what kind of doctor that kid turned out to be. But deep down, he already knew it wasn't about curiosity. It was about finally looking at the life that grew out of his worst mistake. Hospitals had a smell he'd never forgotten, disinfectant and quiet. He walked the corridor like a man visiting an old ghost. Through the glass wall of the surgical waiting room, he saw him, Ethan Pierce, tall, confident, kind eyes behind his mask as he spoke to a patient's family. The way he stood, the way he rubbed the back of his neck when he thought. It was like watching a younger version of himself in someone else's body. Jack lingered near the vending machine, pretending to read a sign. Ethan passed within a few feet, smiling politely the way you do at strangers. "Morning," Ethan said. Jack nodded, his throat too tight for words. When a young doctor disappeared down the hall, Jack leaned against the wall and exhaled slowly. He felt pride, guilt, and something warmer, relief, maybe. The kid had a good life, better than anything Jack could have given him then. And maybe that was enough. Alan was already there when Jack walked into O'Malley's that evening. Same seat, same drink, same quiet air about him. The city outside buzzed, but inside, time felt slower, like they'd both come to the only place that still let men speak without being judged. Alan looked up as Jack sat down beside him. "Long day." Jack nodded. "You could say that." They drank in silence for a while. Then Alan said softly, "My boy. He came by the hospital today. Long shift." He looked tired. He smiled faintly, pride softening his features. "You know, sometimes I still see him as that baby we carried out of the nursery. Makes you realize how fast a life can go." Jack listened quietly. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed steady. "You did good by him. That's what matters." Alan turned, studying Jack's face. "You talk like a man who knows what losing feels like." Jack met his eyes. "We all lose something sooner or later. The trick's living with what you kept." For a long moment, neither spoke. Just two fathers side by side, one who had raised a boy and one who had walked away, both in their own way paying the same price. Alan turned the glass in his hand, watching the ice melt. The sound of laughter came from a booth across the room, but here at the bar, it was quiet, like the world had stepped aside for their conversation. "You know what's strange?" Alan said finally. "All these years, I've carried this fear. Not of losing him, not really, but of someone showing up one day. A man, maybe younger than me back then, maybe older now. A man who'd look at him the way I do, and I'd know he was the one who left him behind." Jack didn't move. Alan let out a slow breath. "It's a stupid fear. He's grown. He's mine, but I still think about it sometimes. How that man would feel, seeing what he gave up, seeing how it turned out." Jack's eyes stayed on the bar top. "Maybe he'd be grateful," he said quietly. "Maybe he'd see the kid got the life he was supposed to have." Alan studied him for a long moment, then gave a faint nod. "Maybe." Neither of them said another word. But both men knew the conversation was over, because there was nothing left to confess. The truth had already been spoken, just not aloud. For the next few days, Jack couldn't focus. He'd go through the motions at the shop, oil changes, brake pads, invoices, but his head wasn't there. Every sound of the wrench hitting metal pulled him back to that hospital corridor, that signature, that storm. At night, he'd replay the same question. Should I tell him? What would he even say? "Hey, I'm a guy who walked out before you could take your first breath." It sounded cruel, selfish, but staying silent felt worse, like betraying something sacred. He drove by St. Luke's more than once, parking across the street, just to watch people come and go. One afternoon, he saw Ethan again, walking with another doctor, laughing, alive, completely unaware of the man in the truck watching from a distance. Jack gripped the steering wheel hard. He could walk in, shake the young man's hand, pretend he needed to tune up, start a conversation. Maybe that would be enough. Maybe not. He pictured his wife's face, his kids, the life he had now. And for the first time, he realized the truth wasn't about what he wanted. It was about what might break someone else's peace. He sat there until the sun dipped low over the city. Then he whispered, Not today. But even as he drove off, he wasn't sure if he meant not today or not ever. The bar was quiet that night, the kind of quiet that makes every glass clink sound louder. Alan sat where he always did, reading the paper, a half-finished drink beside him. When he saw Jack walk in, he smiled, friendly but tired. "Didn't think you'd show tonight," he said. Jack sat beside him. Couldn't stay home. Mind wouldn't quit. They spoke about nothing, weather, the game, the noise of the city. But beneath the surface, the air between them felt weighted, not with secrets, but with shared understanding. Two men who had both carried heavy things through life. After a while, Alan sighed. "You ever notice how some stories don't really end? They just settle?" Jack nodded slowly. "Yeah, sometimes that's the best we can hope for." Alan gave a faint smile. "You've got a good way of looking at things, Jack. Makes me think you've lived through more than you let on." Jack's eyes dropped to his glass. "Maybe, but some things are better left where they belong." Alan only nodded, content with that. He didn't ask for more. And for Jack, that silence, that mercy, was enough. A week later, Jack stopped by St. Luke's one last time. No reason, no plan. Just a pull he couldn't ignore. It was a clear morning, bright cold, the kind of Chicago day that made breath hang in the air. He parked across the street, coffee in hand, and watched the hospital doors open and close with the rhythm of another workday. Then he saw him, Ethan, laughing with a nurse, phone tucked under his arm. That same quick smile Jack used to have before the world made him quieter. The kid looked happy. Whole. Jack stayed where he was. No introductions, no confessions. He just watched for a while, long enough to feel something shift inside him. Not peace exactly, but something close. When Ethan disappeared through the sliding doors, Jack turned toward his truck. He took out the old hospital bracelet from his pocket, ran his thumb across the faded words, and placed it gently in the trash bin by the curb. As he started the engine, he caught his reflection in the rearview mirror, older, lined, but softer somehow. He whispered, barely audible, "You got it right this time, kid." Then he drove off into the noise of the city, not lighter, but finally unburdened.